Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and now Blue Sky at Hawk Blogger. And it's been a long time, dude.
It has been.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
But our good pal Brady Henderson of ESPN joining us this morning to talk about this Seahawks game against the Jets. How was your trip out?
It was fine. Yeah, I had a connection in Salt Lake City. But by the way, before we start, I just got to admire. This is like an entire production studio that you've got here. I can barely figure out how to plug my phone in to charge it sometimes. And you've got an entire, you're like a one-man producer, host, everything here. This is incredible.
Well, thank you. I gotta keep up with the big boys over there at ESPN, and I've seen you on Mitch's show attempt to get a microphone plugged in. So anytime you need my help, I'm there for you.
It's always an adventure, yeah. No, I'm just very impressed with the technological proficiency you've got going on here.
Yes, there are advantages to working in tech for a while. How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. Yeah, we had Thanksgiving dinner at my girlfriend's house in Tacoma, and then we drove up and had dessert at my mom's place. So a little bit of driving, but it was fun.
What was for dessert that was drive-worthy?
It was pumpkin pie and pecan pie.
Oh,
and
solid.
a nice cup of coffee. And
Solid.
And some Jeopardy on TV. So it was good.
Nice.
How was yours?
It was good. Yeah, a little bit unique this year to do Thanksgiving and then hop on a plane the next day.
Yeah.
And but we saw, Rachel's got family out here, so the family came out here, and it's great. It's great, actually. My father-in-law and my oldest son, are coming to the game today.
Oh, there you go.
They'll be, I don't know when they'll arrive. They'll probably get here at second quarter and leave by the third quarter, knowing them, but they'll be here. So. A couple things I just want to jump in with you on this game, because I think this is kind of it's a more interesting game than you'd think for a game against a 3-8 team.
Yeah.
The line for this game opened with the Jets as favorites a long time ago, swung all the way to where the Seahawks were 2.5-point favorites, and it's gotten back to where, as of this morning, the Jets are 1-point favorites in a lot of the books. Who do you think should be favored in this game?
Yeah, it's interesting how much the line has moved, because it's not like there's been a major injury or something that you think would change it, other than just, people betting on it and the casinos trying to get as even action on both sides as possible. So I maybe the Seahawks, just because you look at the two records. I mean, the records are what they are. I don't know. I think this is it's the classic kind of trap game when you think about what goes into those. And then, just compare the Giants and the Jets, right?
Yep.
It's one thing to be a team that lacks talent, that's really bad, that's not trying to win, and doesn't seem motivated to win. I think that would describe the Giants.
Yes.
When you consider that they decided to start Tommy DeVito, or that was going to be their plan, to start Tommy DeVito over Drew Lock, because they're not trying to win games. They're trying to, they want to capitalize on this, and they're trying to lose to improve their draft stock. At least that's what it seems like.
Yeah.
That's the Giants situation.
Yeah.
The Jets are a more talented team. Up until a couple weeks ago, I mean, they were still going for it. They traded for Devontae Adams even when they had 3 wins, and they've obviously got a Hall of Fame quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, along with a lot of other talent. Breece Hall, Devontae Adams, even though the Rodgers-Adams connection isn't really there. Quinnen Williams, Garrett Wilson, a bunch of other guys. So this is still a talented team coming off a bye that still appears to be motivated to win. So it's I can see why the line is what it is.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the Giants, and I know you're talking about the Giants now, but there's a lot of folks looking at the Giants game against the Seahawks. Last time the Giants had a lead in a game was against the Seahawks, if you can believe that. And they're like, oh, this is going to be another game like that, potentially. And even then, I think there are differences. Like, you're coming off a Monday night game, short week in that situation, you're home. And Daniel Jones is never going to be confused with even a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
But there are some similarities. Dexter Lawrence absolutely destroyed the Seahawks offensive line. Quinnen Williams is a pretty dang good defensive tackle, and that Giants defensive line really controlled the Seahawks offense for much of that game. Sato Lamea is going to get his first start. I'm curious your perspective on how you were there. Obviously, we were standing next to each other when when Mike McDonald corrected the assumption that Christian Haynes was going to get this start.
Right.
What do you make of what's going on there?
Yeah, so I mean that was on, what was that, Monday or maybe I think it was Monday when Mike McDonald was asked a question about Christian Haynes going into this week knowing that he was going to be the starter because Anthony Bradford was out, and it was clear that Bradford wasn't going to play in this game, and McDonald said, well, actually we're going to take a long look at Seatao Laumea this week. So they obviously knew going into it that he was either going to start or play quite a bit in this game, and it's just yet another reflection of where they're at on the offensive line in general, and specifically at right guard, where they feel like the best option is a rookie 6th-round pick who has not played an NFL snap yet. He's been a healthy scratch in all 11 games, and as much as Mike McDonald tried to sell it to us that it wasn't about Christian Haynes losing the job, it was about Seatao Laumea winning the job. Obviously, Christian Haynes played a big part in this, and the fact that he just has not been able to grab a hold of that job, even though he's had plenty of chances to do it. So the wording from McDonald was that Laumea is going to start this game. He said he's going to start the game out, which clearly implies that they're going to see how this goes.
Yep.
And I don't know how you could have any confidence in Laumea to start and finish this game, considering, again, he's a rookie 6th-round pick who has not played an NFL snap yet. And so there's a lot of unknown. And as much as he might have stood out in practice these last few weeks, and I think that's a part of it, is this didn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, he's been I think, slowly building towards this. These aren't always padded practices during the middle of the season, so I don't know how much you can totally glean about a guy's readiness to step in and play, when it's one thing if it's a receiver who's just balling out in practice and getting open and catching every ball thrown his way. It's another thing when it's an offensive lineman and you're not really going full speed in practice during the middle of the season. So I think that's reflected in the kind of okay, we'll see approach that McDonald seemed to be conveying there.
How proud of yourself are you that you've made it to this point of the season where you can pronounce his name compared to where we were preseason?
Yeah.
Looking at phonetical, having to read that to make sure we nailed it.
And having to say it slowly a few times to really get it.
Yes.
Yeah, it actually rolls off the tongue.
It does. It's a fantastic name.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you talk about kind of the words that McDonald used about Laumea and about him earning it in practice. We've heard him talk about other players in that regard. And if we kind of go through that list, like Josh Jobe fits in that list. Kobe Bryant fits in that list.
Cody White,
Tyrese Knight. It seems to me that for the most part, when he's said that, the players actually then shown a reason for their confidence. Is that your recollection?
Yeah, and certainly with Kobe Bryant is the best example of that. A guy who took over the starting job when Rayshawn Jenkins went down and played well enough to where he's now their starter. And Jenkins, it appears, has gotten Wally pipped, and now conceivably that could change. But I saw nothing in that last game I don't think anybody did to any reason to think that they would go back to Rayshawn Jenkins. I mean, Kobe Bryant.
You don't think they're going to sit the Defensive Player of the Week?
Yeah, no, I don't think. But even aside from, I mean, I don't even think I would have seen enough from Rayshawn Jenkins, who played quite a bit as a big nickel and frankly missed quite a few tackles. So, I mean, Kobe Bryant is the best example of that, and I think there's other guys there. I mean, Tyrese Knight. I think he's probably playing better than Tyrell Dotson was at this point, and I think it definitely helps to have a calming veteran presence in Ernest Jones next to him. But every one of those moves, and we'll see what Cody White can do. He balled out in that Rams game. Haven't seen a ton of him since then, but I mean, I think it's kind of a theme to this season is kind of their personnel changes working out for the better in pretty much every case, and we'll see if that happens with Laumea.
Yeah, and I mean, talk about personnel changes and talk about the offensive line. 3 games ago, 60% of this starting offensive line had not played a snap for the Seahawks this year.
Yeah.
Olu, Satawa, and Abe Lucas, right? So it's not very often that you're going to see 60% of your offensive line willingly, to the most part. I guess Olu was not necessarily willingly, but for the most part, switched over by the coaching staff. And I would think that you'd say good things about what's happened with Olu and Abe Lucas. Not quite as strong of a second game as their first game, but you have to wonder about, like, you hear so much about continuity on the offensive line being a thing, and continuity on the offensive line being an important thing for the run game in particular. So there's a lot of coordination involved. What's a realistic expectation for that line coming in to play on the road with whatever crowd noise there will be? Might be booing for all we know. Against a pretty good Jets front, Hassan Reddick, Will McDonald, Quinnen Williams. What do you think is realistic to expect from that group?
Yeah, and Quinnen Williams is the All-Pro. Hassan Reddick was the holdout, who has been back a few weeks now. And Will McDonald, I believe, is among there in terms of the leaders, like an edge pass rush win rate among edge defenders. So it is a very good defensive front, to your point. And the whole idea about continuity, I mean, they realize that they're not blind to the fact that continuity is important. I think it's, again, another reflection of where they're at, that they're saying, okay, it's one thing to have continuity, but that only means so much if you've got a worse player at that spot. So, Olu, I agree with you. He was better in the 49ers game, struggled, I think, a little bit. Abe Lucas, you're still just seeing him kind of shake off the rust and work himself back into game shape. I believe he played the full game last week, right?
He did.
But I think there's still times where it's evident that you still see some of that Abe Lucas dominance that you saw a couple years ago, but you still see a guy who's trying to work his way back into form. And he had the two curious illegal formation penalties.
Where he was a little off the line.
Yeah, he was a little off the line, and that made me wonder, okay, is he just trying to give himself
compensate?
Yeah, like a little bit of a cushion against the edge rusher, and so and he definitely, by the end of that 49ers game, you could tell he was completely gassed, and he said as much afterwards, and it was evident when you went back and watched that final drive. So I think it's I don't think you're going to see this group totally dominate just because there's still kind of a talent deficiency, and they're still working out the kinks together.
Yeah, it's interesting. The run game, when I was talking to Ray Roberts earlier this week, a lot of the fingers go pointing at the offensive linemen for not creating holes. Some of that's absolutely well-founded. Some of it goes to the coaching staff and what they're scheming up. But there are some moments where Kenneth Walker is picking wherever he decides he wants to run versus where there's actually a designed place for it to go. And similar to the run defense a few weeks ago, if you even have one guy kind of doing his own thing, it can kind of lead to a ripple effect of a lot of things going wrong. People are going to focus on the pass game, but this is the number 2 pass defense in the NFL in terms of yards allowed from the Jets. They've been a little more vulnerable on the ground. Do you think this is a game? Kenneth Walker, his rookie year, had 133 yards rushing against the Jets. What do you think is a possibility for the run game? Given how much they've struggled the last few weeks, McDonald seems to think they're getting closer. Do you see signs that they're getting closer? Yeah, well, in terms of the Jet, with bad teams, I think sometimes the passing numbers are down because teams have a huge lead and they're just they're running on them. Fair.
To try to milk the clock. But and I think it's a good point about Walker too. We look at the offensive line whenever you look at running, you just assume that the running back is always going to get whatever's blocked for him. That's not always the case. And Ken Walker, a lot of times, we see him make something out of what should be nothing. You see him turn plays that should be stopped for a loss in the backfield into 4 or 5 yard gains, sometimes bigger than that. But sometimes he also doesn't take what's there, and and that's just true with every running back, because vision is a huge part of that. I think the other thing about their run game is I think that they're missing some of the blocking that they had from their tight ends the last few years, and specifically Will Dissly. Now, that's not to say that they should have kept Will Dissly for the final year of what was a pretty bloated contract.
Yeah.
So you understand the decision to move on from him. And by the way, it's a fascinating backstory on what happened there and why they signed him in the first place. Denver wanted to sign him, and they were like, nope, not. They had already traded Russell Wilson. They felt like he was trying to poach Will Dissly, and I think there was a little bit of pride involved in that, and the reason they went as high as they did. But anyways, they made, I think, an understandable decision to move on from Will Dissly, but they didn't do a good enough job in replacing the blocking presence. They thought Farrell Brown was going to be that guy, and I think the comment was that they thought he was one of the 2 or 3 best blocking tight ends in the NFL, and I have not seen that.
No.
I saw him make a heck of a play to fight for a first down after a catch last week, but I just have not seen this blocking monster at tight end in Farrell Brown that I think they thought they were getting.
Yeah, I wonder if anything has to do with that foot injury that happened in Tennessee in preseason. That at the time there was conversation it could have been a season-ending injury. He went to a doctor, felt like they were going to be able to play through it. You saw the picture of like a pretty bad arch, bottom of his foot. Like, I don't know if that's affecting him still, but
he's not on the injury report. I mean, it'd be one thing if he was on the injury report.
And he has been, I just don't understand. Blocking is not something that you expect to be variable.
Right.
Like, if you're a good blocker, you basically are a good blocker, and it doesn't matter what offense you're in, it should translate.
Yeah.
But yeah, he hasn't even been the best blocker among the tight ends in the room. So, AJ Barner, I think, has had a fine rookie year, but yeah, I've seen a lot of issues tight end with pass protection and with run blocking. I asked Coach McDonald about that either this week or last week, and he was pretty quick to defend that room, feeling like they're doing pretty well, and he likes what Coach Mack is teaching. McPherson's teaching him there. So
Mac Brown,
sorry, yeah. But
not the old Texas coach.
No. So yeah, I don't know. It feels like that's a pretty important part of the recipe for the Seahawks to get things done today. If you had to pick one thing for the Seahawks to do well in order to get a win today, what do you think you'd focus on?
I mean, just off the top of my head, I would say continue with the progress they made in terms of not killing themselves. And the penalties were a huge problem for them. The first 8 or 9 weeks of the season when they were leading the NFL in penalties, and they've done a better job of just not shooting themselves in the foot. And part of the, Mike McDonald always talks about like an individual stat might be actually a team stat, or like a stat that really focuses on one area is really a team stat. I think the penalties are a good example of that. Or when you look at the lack of a run game that they've had, and it's not just the fact that they're not running the ball well, they're not running the ball all that often, but to some degree that's understandable when you consider that they're so often in situations where you just can't run the ball because of down and distance. When you hand off on 1st and 10 and you gain 1 yard, well, guess what you're doing on 2nd down? When you line up on 1st and 10 and you false start and now it's 1st and 15, guess what you're doing on 1st and 15? So up until a couple weeks ago, their average distance needed to convert on 3rd down was I think it was
8.9, right?
8.9 yards, which is an insane amount. So definitely there are situations where they are in favorable running situations, or at least neutral situations, and they don't run the ball. And that makes you wonder, okay, Ryan Grubb is calling plays for a defensive-minded head coach in Mike McDonald who wants to run the ball. And you got to imagine there's some frustration there with McDonald and the fact that they're not running the ball as much as he would want to.
Yeah.
But in some of those situations, you understand where Ryan Grubb is coming from just because they can't run the ball.
We're like, 12 weeks into the season now?
Yeah.
What's been your impression of Mike McDonald?
I think you see the schematic edge. You're starting to see the schematic edge that he's bringing them. And I think you're seeing a guy, like every first-time head coach who's as young as he is especially, you're seeing him kind of figure it out as he goes. And some of the leadership stuff, the way he answers questions in press conferences, sometimes he just doesn't totally feel comfortable, and that's going to be the case with pretty much anybody in that position. But you are seeing the schematic edge that they just haven't had in so many years. And I would even say that even back in like the heyday of this team, the reason that defense wasn't so good wasn't because of the scheme was so complex. It was really the opposite. It was they realized that they had such good talent that they could keep things simple and allow these guys to, the less they have to think, the faster they can play, and they realize that the talent edge, or the talent, difference is going to give them an advantage over teams. And so, but they don't have that kind of talent, and nobody does anymore. And so they needed a schematic edge, and I think McDonald is finally giving that to them.
Yeah, Devin Witherspoon's definitely been giving us that impression the last few weeks. And I'm seeing on the screen here Geno Smith warming up in what was the stadium, or at least the city where he was drafted as a rookie. He's downplayed this being a game that means anything more than any other game to him. What do you think the truth is there?
I kind of buy it. And then the comment that you're referring to was he said, and he sort of volunteered this. He was asked about, is it special to go back to New York and play? He said, yeah, it's special, but in terms of, any sort of revenge game, he said he doesn't have revenge on his mind. Mm-hmm. I actually buy that for a couple reasons. One, the Jets are on, I think, their third head coach since he was last played for the Jets in 2015. Mm-hmm. They're on their second GM. Both those guys on an interim basis. And so, that was, 9 years ago. So a lot of whatever bad blood he might have had against the organization or resentment, I think enough time has passed, enough turnover, there's been enough turnover in the organization that some of that has probably subsided. He also, he had his revenge game in 2022. Mm-hmm. And when, the Seahawks beat the Jets by 30-something points in Seattle. So, he definitely has taken the tact publicly of, remember 2022, he played every team he used to play for, Jets, the Giants, and the Chargers, and he said every time that, he's got nothing but respect for those teams and everything. So I think it's definitely believable when you just consider how much time has passed since then, and again, all the turnover there has been in the organization.
Yeah, I buy that he meant it when he said it. I have to think it's going to feel... There's going to be some feeling stepping in front of Jets fans for the first time as an opposing QB. Like he's like you said, he faced them at home in Seattle and Lumen in 2022. Technically, it was 2023, but it was the end of the 2022 season. But this is his first time back since 2016. Not in MetLife because he played there last year. Right. Beat the Giants, but. There's going to be some interaction between the fans and Geno Smith. There just has to be because there's history there. And, as he kind of closes out this season, he'll be entering the last year of his contract. What do you think the Seahawks want to do? Like, do they need to see something from Geno Smith over the balance of this season in order to... consider extending him next year? Do you think that decision's already made independent of what happens the rest of this season? Where do you think things sit there?
Boy, we could talk until kickoff about this situation. I just think there's more. I really think there's more to the Geno question than what we see and what we tend to talk about, and we tend to focus on the on-field results, which obviously is a huge part of it, as it is with anybody. Mm-hmm. I think it goes deeper than that with Geno, and I think part of their reluctance and something that they need to see from him is the leadership aspect of it. And what did Mike McDonald tell us before the season? He said they wanted Geno Smith to take the next step as a leader. And when we pressed him on that later, he said he wants Geno Smith to be the voice of poise in those chaotic situations. So, and we heard a little bit from Geno after the Bills game, and we saw, an example of him not always keeping his poise, and that is a big thing for them behind the scenes. And I think the general point is leadership in general, but specifically it's what kind of a teammate are you? How well do you keep your cool in tense moments? And he doesn't always do that. There's Dave Pearson right behind us, by the way. Hello. And you saw a good example of that. All right, get out of here, Dave. You saw a good example of that in the Bills game, where there was the play where I think it was one of the interceptions, and he came back on the sideline. So you just, and there was, I think, after, what was it, where he got hit out of bounds and he throws the ball at the guy, because he thought it was a late hit. There was I think they took a delay of game penalty, and he was, kind of frustrated and motioning on the field. So I think that frustration shows up a lot more than we realize, and I think that's something that they've really wanted him to work on. And that is a specific example of just being a really good teammate, being a good leader in general. And so there's the on-field play, there's the leadership component of it that I think that's something that they really need to see. The play, as I'm sure you've talked about on your show, we've all written about, it's been up and down, and you can realize, like, okay, he's got 12 touchdown passes, 12 interceptions, so that's not very good. But when you look at the context of it, bad offensive line, bad run game, then you start to realize, okay, this guy's, doing a lot better amid tough circumstances than, a lot of other quarterbacks would.
Do you think, like, all that makes sense? like it doesn't seem like he's going to change his leadership or who he is in the last part of this year. Like that part's written. So do you think that there's a level of play? If they win the division and make the playoffs and win a playoff game, do you think that just means, well, we know he's not a leader, but he's the best we've got? Or do you think that there's something that could happen that they're like, actually, even with all that, we've seen enough and we need to potentially move on from him next year and see if there's a team that would be interested in a trade?
I think that could be on the table. Yeah, I mean, it always goes back to, okay, what's your alternative? And they're fighting for a playoff spot. They're not going to be, barring some disaster down the stretch, they're not going to have such a bad record at the end of it that they're going to be picking in the top 10, most likely. They don't have, it's not like a Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love situation where you've got a guy waiting in the wings. They traded for Sam Howell with the thought/hope he could be that guy, but I don't think anybody saw anything over the offseason to convince them that Sam Howell is, the next guy who could be the franchise quarterback. I think he looks like a pretty good backup who didn't really take advantage of the opportunities that he had over the offseason and didn't really give anybody a reason to believe that he could step in and be a viable replacement. And so it always goes back to the alternative. Does that necessarily mean that they're going to give him this massive extension? I mean, I don't think so. The trend has been among a lot of teams that, okay, anybody who is anybody in terms of a quarterback, if you're one of the top 15 guys, when your time comes, you're going to be paid like one of the top 5 guys. We saw that with Trevor Lawrence. Saw that with Tua. Saw it with a number of other quarterbacks this offseason. I just don't think the Seahawks are going to play that game. They're not going to play a game of, okay, if Geno Smith, if the numbers say that you're the 15th best quarterback in the NFL, you're not going to pay him like one of the very best. And so it's going to come down to what kind of a deal can you agree on. The leadership aspect is going to be a big part of that. The play over these last 6-7 games is going to be a part of it. But again, it's like, what is your alternative? Geno is under contract for one more season. I think the fact that he wanted a new contract this past off season, and he admitted as much, and I think that was at play with the time that he missed, with those hip and knee injuries when he missed a few days. I think that was a mini protest. So the fact that he wanted a contract last off season, I don't think he's playing under his current contract. Like, I think they have to do something. Meaning I think he's going to force the issue this offseason. And so he is under contract for another year, but I have a hard time seeing him play out the final year of that.
That's interesting. I mean, if you had to place a bet right now, do you think Geno Smith is the starting quarterback for the Seahawks next season?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't think it would be on his current deal. I think it would be maybe there's some sort of a kind of short-term Band-Aid solution where you make Geno happy, you give him a little bit of a raise, but you still give yourself the flexibility of not being tied to this massive long-term deal. So maybe it's like a 2-year extension that bumps up the APY, gets him, what is he, 19th right now?
Yeah.
Gets him a little higher in terms of the quarterback salary rankings, but still doesn't represent that long-term commitment that clearly says, yeah, he's the guy.
Yeah, that makes sense. The Seahawks have all the leverage in this situation with his age, with him under contract, with even if they wanted to apply franchise tag after that, not that they would, and they just have all the leverage. And so I don't think Geno Smith's going to be able to max out his contract demands, and certainly with the season he's had, even if he finishes strong, I don't think there's really a statistical case to make on his behalf to really max it out. So yeah, it's an interesting one, and I do think there's a close to this season that he has to have to just make sure he's part of the plans, because some of those turnovers, I've been a little surprised by the lack of acknowledgement by the coaching staff that there needs to be some change there. Like, McDonald even was kind of excusing, well, you don't want to take the playmaking out of the player.
Yeah.
I had a similar debate with Ray Roberts weeks ago, and I was like, I think Geno Smith simply needs to have a different risk profile in specific situations. If it's 1st and goal and you're up, and even if you don't get a touchdown, you're going to get a field goal that ends the game, a throwaway is way better than almost anything else. And that's how you get Jared Goff, he almost threw a pick in the red zone this week, but he's gone, I don't know how many attempts without a red zone interception, or how many years. Like, it feels like there needs to be some just pre-snap awareness change there. And I think they have, I'm sure they just don't want to air the guy out in public, but he can't, going into this game, he can't have another one of those types of decisions. If you could look at a lot of those interceptions and say, okay, well, arm got hit there. But why did it get hit?
Right, it got hit because he was trying to extend the play, and he didn't throw it away earlier.
Yeah.
And for every interception has a story, and there is, context is important, but there also is, like, okay, the other interception he threw, what was it, in the Rams game where he's trying to hit Barner on the crosser.
Yeah, it gets pulled.
He's trying to play with anticipation.
Yeah, that one makes sense.
Yeah, but also, like, okay, well, don't throw it. Like, if the guy's not open, don't throw it. It is the red zone interceptions, I think, are problematic, and there is always a difference between what the team says publicly and what they say behind the scenes. And I think that McDonald is, like a lot of coaches, he realizes that his words carry a lot of weight, and I think you hear him, like, let's say Tyrese Knight, for example. Mm-hmm. Remember how reluctant he was over the offseason to, like, give Tyrese Knight a lot of public praise?
Yes.
I think these guys know these players in and out. They know their personalities. They know what makes them tick. They know that, okay, some of these guys, you don't want to inflate them too much. You want to keep them humble, because I think the fear is that if you start building these guys up, maybe it goes to their heads a little bit. I think that works in the inverse as well. When you've got a player who's maybe down on himself, you're not going to publicly bash him. You're going to sort of make an excuse for him, and try to prop him back up. And so I think that is also at play with some of what you hear from McDonald. Not necessarily with Geno Smith, but I think that's just a case of he just wants to back his quarterback, and he might have a very different conversation with Geno Smith behind the scenes than what he tells us publicly.
All right, last thing, we'll close up for this edition. I never thought I'd ask you this. Why is Jaren Hall active today?
Oh, yeah. Well, I thought it was going to be like a deeply personal question.
No, okay. That's after.
Yeah, I'm off the hook. Yeah, well.
So third string quarterback, been on the practice squad, active, like raised up from the practice squad yesterday for the first time. Did you see it coming?
No, and we'll I think we'll get some clarity on that in about 14 minutes when the inactives come out, because if he's inactive, then clearly what that was is just a case of them kind of giving the guy a reward for maybe having some good weeks in practice. As you brought up, McDonald had commented on how good of a look he gave them on the scout team when he was sort of playing Kyler Murray, which is the job of a lot of backups, is you're on the scout team and you're trying to give the offense or the defense a good look in terms of like what they're going to see in the upcoming game. And so if he's inactive, then that means they just elevated him off the practice squad to let him collect a game check. So that would come with like a nice financial bump from what you make on the practice squad versus what you make as like 1/17th or 1/18th of the minimum salary. So it could just be a kind of a nice financial reward. I suppose there's a possibility that they actually want him to be active in this game, but neither Geno Smith nor Sam Howell were on the practice squad.
Injury report.
Or on the injury report, I should say. And so that tells me that my guess is we're going to see him inactive, and this is going to be kind of like what they did with Artie Burns in week one. It's just a nice kind of financial reward.
Well, it is worth calling out the Seahawks do that. There are a lot of teams that will not have practice squad elevations, because they don't have to.
Yeah.
But you pay these guys more, and I think it's a class move. If that's the reason, that's a pretty classy thing to do as an organization, because they don't have to spend that money and they're choosing to.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of super chats. One about you that I got to put up here. Garth says Brady looks like Lionel Messi. Have you ever got that?
What? My eyesight's bad. I thought that's what that said, but I didn't want to like zoom in while we were talking.
My week is always better after Aaron Rodgers' loss, so I can see sad Aaron on Pat McAfee. I hear that. I don't know about Lionel Messi yet. I'm not getting that. How are you at soccer? You play at all?
No, haven't played in years.
All right. Well, Rick R gives 5 Hawk Logger memberships. Thanks again, Rick, for your generosity. And Garth says, Brian, do you want to grab a slice in New York? You're gonna grab a slice of New York if so. Where I actually already have had a pepperoni last night, as well as some vodka pizza. Amazing.
Vodka pizza, really? Like vodka sauce?
Yeah, vodka sauce. You can actually get penne pasta and vodka sauce on pizza.
Wow.
It's pretty outstanding, I gotta say. All right, that is it for us. Another pregame edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Brady Henderson, thank you so much for joining ESPN.com. Anything people should look out for coming from you either today or coming up soon?
No.
No, he's just here. He's just here talking to me. All right, everybody, have a great day. I'm Brian Nemeth. You can find me at Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Hawk Blogger. This has been another edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care.